Have you ever thought you had everything, only to realize you were missing the most important thing? Callum Sterling, a billionaire who built his empire from nothing, believes money can solve any problem. But when his son falls ill, the only person who can comfort the boy is Amara Bennett, a nurse who sees wealth not in dollars, but in love. As Callum watches her care for his child, he begins to question everything. But just as he starts to open his heart, a painful truth from Amara's past threatens to tear them apart. Will he risk everything for a love that money can't buy? Stay until the end to discover why Oprah Winfrey once said, "True wealth is not measured by money or possessions, but by the love and relationships we cultivate." New York never slept. From the 42nd floor, the city stretched out like an ocean of lights, reaching endlessly toward the horizon. Billboards flickered, traffic surged through the streets, and people hurried into bars, upscale restaurants, places. Callum Sterling could walk into any time he wanted, but tonight he didn't want to. Inside his penthouse, everything was silent. A silence so thick it felt suffocating. Callum sat in a large armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes fixed on an old photograph. The only light came from a single table lamp, casting a dim glow and throwing his shadow against the wall. Tall, imposing, yet utterly alone. In the picture, she was still smiling, as if time had never touched her. He reached out, his fingers tracing the edges of the photo, but all he felt was the cold glass beneath his touch. She was gone. He had lost count of how many times he had done this. Pour a drink, sink into that chair, stare at the photo, and wait for something that never came. An answer, a forgiveness, a chance to make it right. The clock struck 11, a meaningless number. Since she left, everything had been meaningless. He took a slow sip, the whiskey burning down his throat. But instead of dulling the memories, it only sharpened them. She used to stand here, right by this window, arms crossed, tilting her head at him with that gentle yet disappointed gaze. "You can't keep living like this, Callum." Her words still echoed in his mind, despite the years that had passed. Callum stood, walking toward the glass doors, pressing a palm against their icy surface. The city below kept moving, but his world had long since stopped. His breath fogged up the glass. Out of habit, he traced a small circle with his fingertip. She used to do that whenever it got cold. On winter mornings, she would draw little hearts on the windshield of their car, then turn back to smile at him. "We'll always have each other, through snowstorms or sunshine." That promise had shattered. Callum clenched his fist, wiping the fog away in one swift motion. She wasn't here anymore. Promises meant nothing now. He turned back, poured himself another drink, but this time, he didn't take a sip. His phone buzzed. A name appeared on the screen, one he hadn't expected. Callum hesitated, his gaze darkening. For a moment he considered ignoring the call, just as he had so many times before. But then, slowly, deliberately, he answered. "What is it?" The doctor's voice was calm, yet firm. "Liam isn't doing well. You should come to the hospital." The air in the room thickened. Callum said nothing, gripping the phone tighter. A sensation crawled down his spine, one he thought he had long forgotten. Helplessness. He set his glass down, exhaled a slow breath, and turned toward the door. The penthouse remained just as cold when the door shut behind him. But for the first time in a long time, Callum wasn't leaving to escape his loneliness. He was leaving for someone far more important, his son. The tires crunched against the snow-covered pavement as the Bentley came to a stop in front of the private hospital in Manhattan. Callum stepped out, a half-burnt cigarette between his fingers. He crushed it into the snow, leaving behind a dark smear. An old habit, smoking when he was on edge. Hospitals. He hated them. The sterile coldness, the harsh fluorescent lights, the sharp sting of antiseptic in the air. It all dragged him back to the final days of his wife. His hand clenched. As he stepped inside, his footsteps echoing against the stark white tiles. He couldn't lose another person. A soft, golden glow from the bedside lamp cast a halo over the pristine white sheets, illuminating the small figure curled beneath them. Liam lay there, wide, eyes fixed on the door, waiting. But the door remained closed. No one was coming. Callum knew that look too well, an expectant gaze laced with quiet resignation, as if Liam understood that no one would come, yet still couldn't stop hoping. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Beside Liam, a woman gently pulled the blanket up to his shoulders. Amara Bennett. She wasn't wearing the stiff white coat like the other doctors in this hospital, just a simple dark turtleneck sweater over her uniform dress. Her black hair was neatly pinned back, revealing a slender neck and eyes filled with something rare in places like this: warmth. No effort needed. She didn't have to pretend to care, unlike the nurses who saw their patients as part of their daily routine. Amara was here. She truly cared. "Would you like to hear a bedtime story?" Her voice was soft, as if each word was placed carefully into the quiet space. Never too loud, never too small, just enough to soothe. Liam hesitated for a second before giving a small nod. He had never let anyone outside his nanny tell him bedtime stories, but tonight he didn't take as long to decide. Amara smiled, a real smile, not the polished, practiced ones Callum was used to seeing in hospitals like this. Once upon a time, there was a little bird who got lost in a snowstorm. The wind knocked him down, his tiny wings too weak to fight against the cold. He was scared, shivering, unsure of how to find his way home. Liam blinked, pulling the blanket up a little higher. What happened next? The little bird kept flying, Amara continued, her voice dipping lower, like a warm breath in the cold room. But then, little by little, strangers appeared. A squirrel offered him shelter under a tree. A fox brought him a bit of food. An owl pointed him in the right direction, and with the kindness of those he had never met before, the little bird found his way home. A long silence followed. Liam pressed his lips together before whispering, "But what if no one helps him?" The question made Callum freeze. It wasn't just, a question. It was Liam's deepest fear, and his own. Amara held Liam's gaze for a moment, then reached out, gently brushing a hand over his hair. "There's always someone who cares about you, Liam," she said softly, but with certainty. "Your father loves you very much. Sometimes adults just don't know how to show it." Callum stood outside the door, his grip tightening around the handle, but he didn't push it open. A quiet shift rippled through him. No one had ever said that about him before. No one had ever explained to his son that he was trying, just in a way Liam couldn't understand. No one had ever seen him, not beyond the cold, unyielding armor he had worn for years. Amara had no idea he was standing there. She simply sat beside Liam, watching as the boy nestled deeper into his pillow, his eyes growing heavy with sleep, at peace. Callum's fist clenched, then slowly released. He didn't know what to feel. Who was she, and why? Why could she do something he never could? Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside Callum, something had just shifted. Callum still stood outside the hospital room. Amara's words echoed in his mind, clinging to him like an unwelcome ghost. There's always someone who cares about you, Liam. Your father loves you very much. Sometimes, adults just don't know how to show it. That wasn't how people talked about him. He was used to hearing things like, Callum Sterling doesn't care about anyone but himself, or he only sees the world in dollar signs. But now, inside that hospital room, a stranger had spoken about him as if she understood him better than he understood himself. And that feeling, it unsettled him in a way he couldn't ignore. The hospital room door opened. Fluorescent lights stretched down the stark white hallway, their cold glow accentuating the sterile emptiness. Outside, the wind whistled against the glass, making the silence even heavier. Amara stepped out, closing the door softly so as not to wake Liam. But as she turned, she found herself caught in a sharp, unrelenting gaze. Callum Sterling was standing there. The dim hallway lighting cast shadows over his sharp features, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the furrow in his brow. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at her, assessing, calculating. Amara's breath remained steady. She knew men like him. Powerful, cold, accustomed to control, but she also knew one thing. She wasn't afraid of him. The first confrontation, Callum stepped forward, his polished shoes striking the marble floor with crisp precision. "Oh, want a different nurse." His voice was deep, even, devoid of emotion, not a request, a command. Amara wasn't surprised. She had seen the irritation in his eyes long before he spoke. But instead of reacting immediately, she tilted her head slightly, as if weighing her response. Why? Callum hesitated for half a second. He hadn't expected that. Most people would have, scrambled to accommodate him, to make sure he was satisfied. But not Amara. His gaze darkened. His voice dropped lower, sharper. "I don't need someone teaching me how to be a father." Amara pressed her lips together for a brief moment, but there was no fear, no hesitation in her expression. When she spoke, her words were steady, deliberate. "I'm not teaching anyone anything. I'm just taking care of my patient." Something about the way she said it felt off. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She didn't argue or explain herself. Amara didn't submit, but she also didn't fight. She simply stood there, calm, unwavering, like an immovable force against the storm that was Callum Sterling. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever stood before him without fear or flattery. But Amara Bennett? She met his gaze with quiet certainty, neither challenging nor yielding, and that, more than anything, made Callum uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Amara adjusted the sleeve of her sweater. Then, just before turning away, she paused. Looking straight into his eyes, she spoke slowly, deliberately. "You can choose whoever you want, but your son can't." The weight of those words struck deeper than he expected. Callum didn't decide who Liam trusted. He didn't decide who brought his son comfort. That was Liam's choice. And Liam had chosen her. Callum remained there, silent, watching as Amara walked away, her soft-soled shoes gliding soundlessly over the marble floor. The wind still howled outside the glass windows. But for the first time, it wasn't as cold as the feeling creeping into Callum Sterling's chest. Amara was gone, leaving Callum standing in the hospital hallway, a gnawing sense of unease creeping into his mind. Her last words still echoed in his head, an unspoken challenge that refused to fade. You can choose whoever you want. But your son can't. Callum Sterling was not a man who accepted answers like that. He didn't let people into his life without permission. And no one, not a nurse, not anyone, made decisions for him. Irritation flared. No, she wouldn't stay. His steps were firm, deliberate, carrying him straight to the hospital director's office. A battle of wills, the director's office sat on the top floor, removed from the bustling chaos below. Heavy mahogany furniture, towering bookshelves filled with thick medical texts, abstract paintings on the walls, a blend of science and art. None of it mattered to Callum. He walked in without knocking, the sound of his Italian leather shoes crisp against the polished wood floor. Behind the desk, the hospital director, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with silver-threaded hair and thin-rimmed glasses, looked up, unsurprised. It was as if he had been expecting this. Callum didn't waste time. Want a different nurse. His voice was steady, commanding. No negotiation. No room for argument. Just a decision, like so many others he had made in high-stakes deals. The director didn't answer right away. He set his pen down, folding his hands over the desk, studying Callum with the quiet patience of a man accustomed to dealing with powerful people. I understand, he said slowly, but Liam has grown attached to Miss Bennet. A change right now wouldn't be good for him. Too calm, too certain, not a single hint of hesitation. Callum's eyes narrowed. He was used to people obeying him. Everywhere he went, whatever decision he made, no one dared to oppose him. But here, in this office, with this man, he was being refused, and without fear, his pride bristled. Are you denying my request? His voice dropped lower, carrying a weight that had brought lesser men to their knees. The director didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk, his tone measured but firm. I'm only thinking about what's best for your son. Something hot and sharp twisted in Callum's chest. Money. Power. These were the tools he used to shape the world to his will. But right now, they were useless. For the first time in a long time, he was being told no, and he had no way to force a different outcome. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped against the edge of the desk, a slow, controlled rhythm, a habit when he was calculating his next move. You really believe a nurse can change my son's life? His voice was edged with disbelief, as if the idea itself was laughable. The director didn't answer immediately. He just looked at Callum, then spoke, his words deliberate. No, but I believe someone who genuinely cares about him can. Silence stretched between them. Then the director continued. Liam lost his mother. He needs someone who listens, who truly sees him. And for some reason, Miss Bennet has managed to do what no one else has. The words hit harder than they should have. Callum rose to his feet, his expression darkening. She's just a nurse. The director gave a small, knowing smile. And you? You're just his father. The air in the room grew heavier. It was a simple statement, but it landed like a punch to the gut. A nurse. A father. Two roles that should have had no comparison. Yet in this moment, Amara might have been more important to Liam than he was. This wasn't a battle Callum could win with money. He stared at the director, sharp and unyielding, but instead of arguing, he clenched his jaw and turned, striding toward the door. No parting words, no further demands. But as the door shut behind him, his hand remained curled into a tight fist. Amara Bennett. Who was she to make everything spiral out of his control? Outside, the city lights shimmered against the hospital's glass windows. New York kept moving, as relentless as ever. But for the first time, Callum Sterling felt like he was no longer the one pulling the strings. Callum stepped out of the hospital director's office, his mind tangled with thoughts he didn't want to face. He wasn't used to being denied. He wasn't used to someone else, a nobody of a nurse with no wealth, no power, having such an influence over his son. What had the director said? Liam lost his mother. He needs someone beside him, someone who truly listens. And somehow, Miss Bennett has done what no one else could. The words cut deep, slicing straight through Callum's pride. How could someone like Amara Bennett do what he, Liam's own father, could not? His steps were brisk as he moved down the hospital corridor, thoughts churning. Then a voice, low and raspy, broke through the noise in his mind. He hadn't meant to stop, but something in the way the words were spoken made his feet pause. In a dimly lit corner, past a chipped white door, Callum saw something that made him hesitate. This part of the hospital looked nothing like the pristine, luxurious ward where Liam was being treated. The walls were worn, paint peeling with age. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting a dull, uneven glow, nothing like the polished brilliance of the VIP suites. Inside a small patient room, Callum saw Amara. She was sitting beside an older man, his skin weathered from years of hardship. He wasn't dressed in crisp, freshly laundered hospital gowns like the elite patients. Instead, he wore a thin, fraying sweater, his eyes clouded with both age and fear. A hospital bill trembled in his hands. "I can't pay this," the man murmured, his voice hoarse with uncertainty. Callum narrowed his eyes. Fear? Over a bill? Amara didn't rush to respond. She didn't look impatient or frustrated. Instead, she simply placed her hand gently over his. A small touch, yet more powerful than 1,000 words. "Don't worry," she said softly, but with quiet conviction. "We'll find a way." Callum watched in silence. She didn't say the hospital will help you. She didn't say there's a financial aid program. She said we'll find a way, as if this man's burden was her own. Something about it unsettled Callum. The people he knew, the ones who ran this world, himself included, never did anything without expecting something in return. No one helped for free. No one gave without an agenda. But Amara? She didn't expect money. She didn't expect recognition. She just helped. And that was something Callum couldn't understand. He should have walked away. This wasn't his problem. He had no reason to care about some stranger who would never step foot into his world. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stood there, arms crossed, watching. Not because of Amara, but because he wanted to understand. Why did she do it? Inside the room, Amara finally stood, offering the patient one last reassuring glance before she left. "Get some rest, John," she said gently. "I'll be back tomorrow." Callum remained where he was, his gaze fixed on her. Tomorrow? She actually intended to come back? Outside the hospital window, New York continued to pulse with life, relentless as ever. But here, in this moment, Callum Sterling found himself staring at something he had never truly seen before. A world that didn't run on wealth, but on compassion. He wasn't sure if he liked it, but for the first time he asked himself, "What have I been missing?" Callum left the ward for low-income patients, but his mind remained tangled in what he had just witnessed. The image of Amara leaning down, gently taking a stranger's hand, reassuring him with a simple yet unwavering promise, lingered in his thoughts. "We'll find a way." Why? No one did something for nothing. No one gave without expecting something in return. So, what was she getting out of it? Callum gave a small shake of his head, pushing the thought away as he made his way back to the hospital's main corridor. The clock on the wall read 1:00 a.m. He should have left long ago, yet something kept him here, a feeling unfamiliar, as if he wasn't quite ready to step back into his own world. His pace slowed as he passed the staff area. The break room door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the dim hallway. And then he saw her. The room was small, nothing luxurious or meticulously organized like the places he was accustomed to. A plain wooden table, a few mismatched plastic chairs, a tiny kitchenette where an aging coffee machine hummed, filling the air with the thick scent of burnt coffee. The lighting was soft, casting gentle shadows along the faded white walls. Amara sat slumped over the table, her nurse's uniform wrinkled, dark strands of hair slipping loose around her shoulders. Her breathing was steady, lost in a deep sleep. Not peaceful, but the kind that came from sheer exhaustion. A disposable cup sat nearby, half filled with coffee gone cold. An open patient chart lay before her, her handwriting left unfinished mid-sentence. Callum stopped. He wasn't used to seeing someone like this, wasn't used to witnessing exhaustion, so absolute that someone could collapse into sleep at an uncomfortable table in the middle of a shift, in the middle of a life that never seemed to slow down. He stood there, watching her, a question forming unbidden in his mind. How many hours? Had she worked, and more importantly, why was she still here? Callum inhaled slowly, ready to turn away. He had no reason to stay. But then an image flashed in his mind. Liam lying in his hospital bed, holding Amara's hand, trusting her in a way he had never trusted anyone else. She wasn't just a nurse. She had done something that even he, Liam's own father, had failed to do. His hand clenched inside his coat pocket. He didn't like this feeling, didn't like that a stranger had this much influence over his son, didn't like that he, a man who cared for no one beyond himself, was standing here, watching her sleep as if it meant something. A cold draft slipped through the doorway, and Amara shivered slightly. The thin fabric of her uniform did little against the chill of the late hour. Then, almost unconsciously, Callum moved. He reached for the sweater draped over the back of her chair and carefully laid it over her shoulders. A simple gesture. Thoughtless. And yet, as soon as he did it, he froze. What the hell am I doing? An unfamiliar sensation settled in his chest. He had never done something like this before, had never paused to wonder if someone was cold or tired or needed something, especially not someone who had nothing to do with him. For the first time, Callum had cared about someone without any self-interest attached, and that terrified him. He glanced at her again. With the added warmth of the sweater, her face looked more relaxed, her features softer under the dim light. For a fleeting moment, he forgot that he didn't belong here. A thought crossed his mind before he could stop it. Has she eaten? The question lingered in the silence. No one heard it. No one answered, and Callum didn't expect a response. He stood there for a few more seconds, then turned, slipping out of the room as if he had never been there. But as the door closed behind him, he knew one thing. Something inside him had shifted, just a little. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could control it. The staff lounge had fallen into silence. The warmth of the sweater draped over her shoulders felt strange, like a lingering presence, a quiet gesture of care she hadn't expected. But Amara didn't have time to dwell on it. Outside, the hospital kept moving. The rhythmic steps of nurses echoed down the hall, the occasional alarm buzzed, patients needed attention. She stretched, pressing her fingertips to her temples to ease the lingering fatigue. One last round of patient checks, and then she could finally leave. But just as she reached for the door, a low voice sounded behind her. "We need to talk." Amara turned. Standing before her was James Whitmore, the hospital's executive director. A man of sharp suits, sharper eyes, and a demeanor that was always calm, always calculating. Less than 10 minutes later, Amara sat across from him in his office. The space was far more refined than the hospital areas she usually occupied. Framed artwork lined the walls, a sleek glass desk held neatly stacked medical reports, and a small, well-stocked bar gleamed under the ambient lighting. James held a silver invitation with gold trim between his fingers. "Miss Bennett, I assume you've heard about tonight's Sterling Investments charity gala?" Amara's brows knitted slightly. Of course, she'd heard of it, a gathering of New York's most powerful figures, a place where obscene amounts of money were thrown around for the sake of prestige, applause, and the illusion of philanthropy. A world where she did not belong. "Don't think that's the place for me," she said plainly. James smiled, but there was something in his gaze that put her on edge. "Is that so?" "Funny, because I was informed that Callum Sterling personally requested your attendance." Amara froze. "Callum Sterling? He wanted her there?" James continued, his voice slow, measured, watching her reaction. "This is a rare opportunity, Amara. The gala isn't just about raising funds. It's a chance for the benefactors to connect with the medical professionals they're supporting. Amara wasn't naive. This wasn't just an invitation. Callum wanted her there for a reason. And James Whitmore, though he wouldn't say it outright, wanted the same thing. Maybe they wanted to test her. Maybe they wanted to watch her. Or maybe they wanted her to fail. Amara straightened in her chair, meeting James's gaze without flinching. "If I refuse?" James shrugged, taking a slow sip of his drink. "No one's forcing you, Bennett. But in places like this, opportunities tend to come only once. A polite invitation. Or a warning." When Amara left the office, the silver and gold invitation still sat in her hands. She didn't like that world. She didn't trust people who only gave when cameras were flashing. She didn't believe in rehearsed smiles, performative handshakes, or hollow congratulations. But she wanted to know why Callum Sterling wanted her there. And more than that, she wasn't about to let him think she was afraid. This wasn't about power. It wasn't about money. It was about proving that Callum Sterling didn't get to control this narrative. If he wanted her to see his world, she would, and she would make. Damn sure he knew she wasn't impressed. Outside, New York glowed. Car headlights, streetlights, the endless pulse of a city that never stopped moving. Amara tightened her grip on the invitation and strode toward the exit. She had made her decision. She would go, not for Callum Sterling, but to show him that he couldn't make her hesitate. The car door opened. Amara stepped out, the sleek black dress hugging her slender frame. Simple, understated. Among the extravagance surrounding her, she was nearly invisible. But the eyes of the attendees found her instantly. They didn't look at her as an honored guest, but as someone who had wandered into a world where she didn't belong. She didn't care. She was used to those looks. The marble steps stretched before her, leading into the grand entrance of the metropolis. One of the most luxurious hotels in New York. Inside, towering crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, reflecting off delicate wine glasses balanced on silver trays. Men in tailored tuxedos, women adorned in diamonds and silk, conversations layered with transactions and ambition. A world Callum Sterling ruled. Amara didn't linger to take it all in. She wasn't curious, because she had seen this before. She wasn't impressed. Across the room, Callum Sterling watched her. He had expected her to come, but he hadn't expected this. The way she walked in without hesitation, without a flicker of uncertainty. No bowed head, no timid steps. She didn't belong here, but she also refused to let this place define her. Callum set his glass down, abandoning his conversation with a group of associates, and strode toward her. "You finally made it." Amara met his gaze, unreadable, her expression devoid of pleasantries. "You told me I should see your world," she said evenly. "I'm here, and what do you think?" Callum tilted his head, a flicker of amusement in his smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Amara's gaze swept across the room, where people raised their glasses in toasts, their laughter effortless, their eyes calculating. "I see people who have everything," she murmured, still trying to prove they have a heart. Callum's eyes narrowed slightly. Amara continued, her tone devoid of mockery. Just a quiet truth. "Money buys a lot of things, Callum, but it doesn't buy sincerity." The space between them tensed. Callum took a slow sip of his drink, his sharp gaze dissecting her words. "And sincerity," he mused, "is what, exactly? An ideal for people who have nothing to cling to?" Amara's lips curved, just slightly. Not a soft smile, but one that knew exactly what it was up against. "No," she said, measured and deliberate. "Sincerity is what you realize matters most when you've lost everything else." She wasn't condemning him. She wasn't telling him he was wrong. She was simply stating a truth. And somehow, that truth was more unsettling than any accusation. Callum's fingers tightened slightly around his glass. She always did this, challenged him. And the most frustrating part? He didn't have an immediate response. Amara didn't wait for him to find one. She set her glass down, her gaze unwavering. "Thank you for the invitation, Callum, but I didn't need to see your world to know it isn't mine." Then she turned. Callum stood still, watching as she walked away, an unshakable sense of unease settling inside him. He should let her go. He should turn back to the party, to the people who understood the rules of his world. But for the first time, That world didn't feel like enough. For the first time, Callum Sterling found himself wondering, did he really have everything? Beyond the windows, New York glittered with endless light, but in Callum's eyes, for the first time, it looked strangely empty. New York at night was still loud, still dazzling, but inside the sleek luxury car gliding through the streets, Callum Sterling sat in silence. Neon lights flashed against towering skyscrapers, yet they did nothing to erase the strange emptiness settling inside him. Amara's last words echoed in his mind, sharp as a blade cutting through the walls he had spent years fortifying. "You'll know when you lose it," a simple statement. Yet it had stayed with him all night. Callum didn't like this feeling he was used to control. With money, with power, with numbers in his hands, there was nothing he couldn't buy. So why did everything feel so uncertain this time? Snow blanketed the city, stretching across the streets like an endless, untouched canvas. The oak trees in the park stood bare against the winter sky, their skeletal branches reaching toward the heavy gray clouds. Cold air wrapped around New York, but in one small corner of the park, warmth existed. A laugh rang out, light, uninhibited, a child's laughter, pure and carefree. Callum stopped walking. Through the soft flurry of snow, he saw them. Liam and Amara. Liam, his quiet, guarded son, the boy who had barely smiled since his mother's death, was building a snowman with Amara. He laughed, full and unrestrained, as Amara struggled to press a carrot into the snowman's face, only for the entire head to roll off. Amara fell back into the snow, letting out a breathless laugh. She didn't rush to fix it, didn't correct him, didn't try to teach him the right way to do it. She simply laughed, like a child, and Liam laughed with her, his voice carrying through the crisp winter air, drowning out the icy wind. For the first time since his wife died, Callum saw his son truly laugh. Not a polite smile, not a forced, half-hearted grin. A real, unguarded, joyful laugh. A sound without fear, without pain lurking beneath it, something that, no matter how much wealth Callum possessed, he had never been able to give his son. He stood there, arms crossed, watching them. A part of him wanted to step in, to pull Liam away from this moment. Because this didn't make sense. Amara wasn't Liam's mother. She had no responsibility toward him. She had no reason to be here, in the freezing cold, building a snowman with a child who wasn't hers. Yet she was here, and she was doing it. Without obligation, without duty, without expectation, simply because she cared. A strange feeling settled inside Callum. Not jealousy, not anger, just realization. She understood his son. Callum Sterling didn't believe in things that couldn't be measured, things without logic, without a price. But now, watching Liam and Amara, he found himself asking, how had she done it, and why was he, Liam's own father, incapable of the same? Snow kept falling, white and endless. But for the first time, Callum felt a flicker of light breaking through his own winter. Callum Sterling had never liked uncertainty. He was a man of control, always had been. And yet now, standing in his penthouse, looking out over the glittering skyline of New York, he felt something slipping through his grasp. The image of Amara and Liam in the park lingered in his mind, the way she laughed with his son, the way Liam trusted her, effortlessly, without hesitation. Not because she tried, Not because she convinced him, simply because she was there. For the first time, Callum felt an urge, one he couldn't ignore. He needed to know more about Amara Bennett, not as a nurse, not as the woman Liam had chosen to trust, but as a person. Brooklyn, place Callum Sterling never set foot in unless he had a reason. Red brick buildings, graffiti-streaked walls, streets without a single luxury car or designer suit in sight. This wasn't his world, but it was hers. The small bell above the cafe door chimed as Callum stepped inside. The space was warm but unpretentious. Worn wooden tables, mismatched chairs. The rich scent of freshly ground coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of jazz from an old speaker mounted on the wall. No $1,000 champagne. No silk gowns or pressed tuxedos. Just people. Ordinary, content, existing in a world where wealth wasn't the currency of survival. And there, by the window, Amara Bennett was waiting for him. Callum pulled out a chair, settling across from her. He had never been in a place like this, had never imagined himself spending an afternoon in Brooklyn with a woman like Amara. She took a slow sip of her coffee, then looked out the window, her eyes distant, as if seeing something far beyond the streets in front of her. "My mother was a janitor at an elementary school," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Callum stilled. He hadn't expected her to start like that. She didn't turn to look at him. She just kept going. She worked from morning till night, and when her shift ended, she cleaned houses for extra cash, day after day, year after year. A small smile touched her lips, but it wasn't a happy one. She always told me that if we worked hard enough, things would get better. Callum didn't speak. He had heard many stories about people clawing their way out of poverty, but something in the way she said it made this different. "When she got sick, I hoped she would get treatment." Amara let out a quiet breath, her fingers brushing the rim of her coffee cup. "But it turns out, if you don't have money, you don't get a chance." Callum's grip tightened around the silver spoon resting on the table. Not out of anger, but because, for the first time, he felt powerless in the face of something he couldn't change. The millions he handled every day suddenly felt meaningless in comparison to this. In the world of Wall Street negotiations, Callum had always categorized people. The ones with money, the ones who wanted money, and the ones who would never have money. But when he looked at Amara, he didn't see any of those. He just saw a person who had lost something. Just like him, a person who understood exactly how unfair the world could be, yet refused to let it define her. Callum had always believed money was the answer to everything. But today, he realized, money hadn't saved her mother, just like it hadn't saved the one person he had loved most. No words of comfort left his lips, no empty phrases like, "I'm sorry," or, "She must have been an incredible woman." He just sat there, looking at Amara, realizing that for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say, because for the first time, he wasn't the one with all the answers. He was just someone listening, and maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The noise of Brooklyn streets faded into the background as Callum Sterling sat in his car, his gaze fixed on the cafe window. Amara was gone. But her words remained. "If you don't have money, you don't have a chance." The sentence echoed in his mind, refusing to be ignored. Callum Sterling had never been the kind of man to dwell on things that didn't concern him. And yet, for the first time, he felt the weight of a responsibility he hadn't asked for. He couldn't change Amara's past, but maybe, just maybe, he could change something now. Unlike the gleaming VIP wing, where everything was polished, precise, and wrapped in quiet luxury, the hospital's free clinic was a different world entirely. Faded walls, crowded waiting rooms, the sharp scent of antiseptic lingering in the air. The people here had no other options. They didn't come because they wanted to. They came because this was the only place left to turn to. Callum stepped into the hallway, his tailored suit a stark contrast to his surroundings. No one noticed him. They were too busy facing their own struggles, but Callum wasn't here to be noticed. He was here for something else, an act, without an audience. At the far end of the hallway, a middle-aged woman sat hunched on a waiting room chair, thin, frail. Her hands trembled as she clutched a hospital bill, knuckles white from the pressure. Her eyes were reed-rimmed, silent, tears slipping down her cheeks. A young nurse stood before her, voice gentle but edged with helplessness. "I'm so sorry," the nurse said softly, "but if you can't pay this amount..." The woman let out a choked sound, gripping the paper tighter. She couldn't even speak, just looked up with the kind of desperation that only came from running out of options. Then, suddenly, a doctor approached. His expression was neutral, but there was something uncertain in his eyes as he glanced at the patient's file. "Your bill has been paid," he said, flipping through the records again as if to confirm. "The entire amount has been covered." The woman froze. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to make sense of what she had just heard. "Who?" Her voice cracked barely above a whisper. The doctor shook his head. "We don't know. The payment was made anonymously." A silence settled over the room. Then, abruptly, the woman broke down. She pressed a hand to her chest, her body racked with sobs, not of grief, but of relief. Around her, people exchanged confused glances, but no one asked further. No one needed to. A small miracle had happened. That was enough. From the shadowed corner of the hallway, Callum watched. His hand remained tucked in his pocket, fingers curling slightly. He felt no hesitation, no regret. He didn't need the woman to know it was him. He didn't need gratitude. He just needed to know it had been done. For the first time, Callum Sterling had signed a check not for profit, not for leverage, but simply to fix a small piece of a world he had ignored for too long. Amara stood a few steps away. She had seen everything. She wasn't surprised, perhaps because some part of her had already known there was only one man in this hospital capable of doing such a thing. She stepped closer, studying him. "Why did you do that?" Callum turned to face her, and this time, he didn't look away. He didn't shrug, didn't deflect, didn't turn it into a calculated response. Instead, he answered simply, honestly, "Money can't buy love, but it can save a life." Amara was silent. That wasn't something Callum Sterling would have said before. She searched his face looking for traces of arrogance, of insincerity. But this time, there was nothing but the truth. She didn't respond, with praise or admiration. She only gave him a small, quiet nod, and Callum, for the first time, nodded back. No more words, just a moment of stillness between two people beginning to understand each other in a way no argument ever could. The hospital had quieted after a long day. Callum Sterling stepped out of the hallway, the same place where just moments ago a woman had wept, not in despair, but in relief, when her medical bills were paid. He hadn't said another word to Amara after his last sentence. There was no need, but as he walked away, he could still feel her gaze on him. No longer wary, no longer guarded, just watchful, as if she was trying to understand him. And the strangest thing was, Callum didn't feel the urge to escape that look anymore. Something inside him was shifting, not sudden, not loud, but slow, quiet, like snow falling in the dead of winter. Snow blanketed the city, glistening under the glow of streetlights. The air was crisp, biting, but it didn't stop the park from teeming with life. Couples walked hand in hand. Children giggled, their laughter weaving through the twinkling Christmas lights strung along bare tree branches. And in one quiet corner of the park, 3 people were living a different kind of moment. Amara smiled as Liam hopped onto a small sled, his eyes bright with excitement. She knelt down, gripping the rope tightly, then began pulling him forward with slow, steady steps. Liam's laughter rang out as the sled picked up speed, the cold wind rushing past his face. A few feet away, Callum stood with his hands in his coat pockets watching. For the first time, Callum joins the moment. He had always observed from a distance, even with Liam. Since his wife's passing, Callum had unconsciously built a barrier between himself and his son. Not because he didn't love him, but because he didn't know how. But tonight, as he watched Amara pulling Liam through the snow, as he listened to his son's laughter echo into the winter air, something in him stirred. At first, it was just a passing thought. Then, without fully thinking, Callum moved. His hand reached for the sled's rope. For the first time, he didn't calculate, didn't weigh the risks. He simply acted, and without warning, he ran. Liam let out a thrilled scream as the sled shot forward, gliding effortlessly over the smooth snow. His laughter rang out, pure and uninhibited, carving its way into something deep inside Callum. Amara froze. She had always seen Callum as cold, as a man who cared only for power and wealth. But here, under the soft golden glow of the park's lights, she saw something else entirely. She saw a father. Callum Sterling was not a man who smiled. Those who met him, who worked with him, who negotiated with him, all knew this. His smiles, when they appeared, were calculated. A social courtesy, a warning. But tonight, in the middle of a snow-covered park, Amara saw him laugh. Not a smirk, not the polished grin of a seasoned businessman. A real, unguarded, carefree laugh. He laughed when Liam squealed in delight. He laughed when the sled nearly tipped over, sending his son tumbling into the snow. He laughed because for once he wasn't Callum Sterling, the ruthless billionaire. He was simply a father, playing with his son in the snow. And that, to the world, might have seemed insignificant. But to him, it was monumental. Amara didn't know what moved her more. Liam's laughter, the sound of a child who had been too quiet for too long, or Callum's smile, the kind she never thought she would see. In that moment, she didn't see a ruthless businessman. She didn't see a man obsessed with control. She saw a father trying, truly trying, to reach his son. And she realized something. Maybe Callum Sterling wasn't the man she had believed him to be. The snow kept falling, soft, silent. as if it too was bearing witness to the quiet transformation of a man the world never thought would change. Liam's laughter still lingered in the air as Callum and Amara left the park. The moment they got into the car, Liam drifted off to sleep, his cheeks still flushed from excitement. Callum glanced at his son through the rearview mirror, a strange feeling settling in his chest. It had been so long since he had seen Liam laugh like that, and even longer since he had felt like he wasn't a stranger to his own child. Amara didn't say much on the drive back. She simply stared out the window, the city lights casting shifting patterns of gold and shadow across her face. Something between them had shifted, not because of words, but because of a moment, one too real for either of them to deny. New York stretched before them, a sea of golden, lights reflecting off the snow-dusted rooftops. The air was cold, biting, but neither of them seemed to notice. Amara leaned against the balcony railing, the steam from her cup of mulled wine curling into the night air. Callum stood beside her, his usual distance nowhere to be found. The space between them wasn't just a few inches on this balcony. It was years of living in different worlds, but tonight that space felt a little smaller. Have you ever wished you could change the past? Callum's voice was low, contemplative. Amara turned to look at him, studying him for a moment before answering. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly, turning the glass in his hand. If you had the chance, would you change anything? There was something in his tone, something unspoken yet heavy, laced with regret. Amara held his gaze for a moment before shaking her head. No. Callum frowned slightly, surprised. A faint smile touched her lips, but her eyes held quiet certainty. Because it made me who I am today. The words struck something deep within him. Callum had lived his life haunted by regret, always wondering if he had done things differently, if he had made another choice, would his wife still be alive? But Amara, she didn't let the past define her. She had lost, but she refused to let loss own her. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. You have no regrets? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara took a slow breath, her gaze distant. Of course I do, she admitted. But if I change the past, I might lose who I am. And no matter how painful it is, I wouldn't want that. She turned to him. What about you? Callum didn't answer right away. He had spent too many years trapped in the what-ifs, in the questions that never had answers. But Amara was right. If he kept chasing the past, he would never learn how to live with what was left. He looked out, at the city, bright, endless, yet strangely hollow. Then, finally, he turned back to her. She was staring into her cup, lost in thought. You should get some rest. It's late, she murmured. Callum frowned. What about you? She inhaled deeply. I'll stay with Liam. She didn't wait for his response. Setting her glass down, she turned toward the balcony door. Her hand had barely touched the handle when Callum spoke. Amara. She paused, glancing over her shoulder. Thank you. A simple word. But in his voice, there was something raw, something real. Amara didn't reply. She simply held his gaze for a second before offering him a small nod, then quietly disappeared back inside. Callum said nothing as the door closed, behind her. But as he stood there, alone with the city stretching before him, he knew something had changed. Amara walked down the quiet hallway of the VIP wing, her breath merging with the cool air from the ventilation system. She had just left the penthouse balcony, where she and Callum had shared the most honest conversation they'd ever had. His words still echoed in her mind. "You have no regrets?" "No, because they made me who I am today." She had always believed that. She had never once wished to undo her past, but now, for the first time, she found herself wondering, was she risking her heart again? She stopped in front of Liam's hospital room. Inside, he was fast asleep. His fever had broken, his breathing even. A corner of his blanket had slipped down and Amara gently pulled it back up, tucking it around him as if she were protecting something fragile. Perhaps she was just as fragile. She needed space to think, and the only person who could help her right now was Jasmine. The VIP staff lounge was far from the luxury of the patient suites, but it was comfortable enough. A small couch, a scratched wooden coffee table, a coffee machine that had seen better days but still worked tirelessly. Amara sat on the couch, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. The warmth seeped through her fingers, but it wasn't enough to quiet the storm of thoughts inside her. She didn't even realize she had smiled, just a little, when she thought about Callum and Liam, about the way Liam had laughed when Callum pulled his sled, about the way Callum had looked at her, not with cold detachment, but with the eyes of a man searching for something he wasn't sure he could name. She had never thought Callum Sterling could change, but maybe he was. "Amara!" The familiar voice pulled her back to reality. She looked up to see Jasmine standing in the doorway, arms crossed, concern etched in her face. Jasmine knew her better than anyone. They had survived the hardest years together, through nursing school, through brutal night shifts. Jasmine had been there when Amara's engagement fell apart. Jasmine had been there when Amara's mother died. And now, she was here, with that look Amara knew all too well, the look of someone about to say something she didn't want to hear. Jasmine stepped inside, closed the door, then sat beside her. "I've never seen you like this." Amara took a slow sip of coffee, keeping her voice neutral. "Like what?" Jasmine leaned back, exhaling. "Like you're thinking about him." Amara didn't answer right away, because if she denied it, she would be lying, and if she admitted it, she would have to face the truth that she was letting Callum Sterling slip into her heart. Jasmine studied her for a moment before speaking again, her tone more serious this time. "Amara, you're smart. You know Callum Sterling isn't like us." Amara set her cup down, meeting her friend's gaze. "What are you trying to say?" Jasmine hesitated, then spoke carefully, her voice heavy with concern. "He might be a better man than he was. He might even be changing. But his world—" She shook her head. "It's not meant for you." A quiet pressure built inside Amara's chest. She wasn't someone who let others' opinions sway her, but Jasmine wasn't just anyone. Jasmine was family. "You think I'm not good enough for him?" Jasmine shook her head instantly. "No, it's the opposite." Her voice was firm. "I'm afraid that no matter how much he loves you, he'll never truly belong in your world." Amara opened her mouth to argue, but then she had no answer. And that was the problem. She wasn't sure if Callum could step out of his world for her. Jasmine reached for Amara's hand, squeezing it gently. Her voice softened, but her words were unshakable. "I've seen this story too many times, Amara. A man like him, he can love you, he can try. But in the end, when the weight of his world comes crashing down on you. Are you sure you'll survive it? Amara didn't respond because she wasn't sure. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure about anything. Callum Sterling could change, but could his world change for her? Outside the window, the snow kept falling, blanketing the city in quiet stillness. But this time, it no longer felt peaceful. Jasmine had left, but her words lingered in the air, refusing to fade. Amara sat alone in the staff lounge, staring at the dark surface of her coffee. He might love you. He might try to change. But in the end, when the weight of his world comes crashing down on you, are you sure you can survive it? She closed her eyes, taking a slow, steady breath. She knew Callum was changing. She had seen it with her own eyes, but the real question was, would it ever be enough? She pressed her fingertips to her temple, trying to push away the storm of thoughts in her mind. Then, the sharp ring of her phone shattered the silence. She glanced at the screen. Callum Sterling, her brows pulled together. It was nearly midnight. Why was he calling her now? A cold feeling settled in her chest. She picked up. His voice came through, rough, unsteady, almost desperate. Liam has a fever. It's bad. I need you. Outside, the blizzard howled, snow hammering against the glass windows with relentless force. It was as if nature itself wanted to break through, to consume everything in its path. But inside the penthouse, all the wealth and luxury meant nothing. Nothing at all. In the vast bedroom, dim lighting cast long shadows over the bed where Liam lay. His small body curled up under the blankets, trembling. His face was flushed, his breathing uneven, his tiny fingers clenching at the sheets. Callum knelt by the bed, his hand pressing against his son's burning forehead. It was like touching fire. Panic clawed up his throat. "Liam, can you hear me?" His voice was hoarse, strained. No response. His chest tightened. No, 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 no. He couldn't lose him. He couldn't go through this again. Shoving a shaking hand into his pocket, he yanked out his phone, gripping it so hard his knuckles turned white. He dialed his private doctor. The moment the line connected, he didn't waste a second. "Get here. Now. Liam has a fever. High. I need you here immediately." Minutes later, the doctor arrived, carrying his medical bag. Callum stood rigid by the bed, his hands clenched so tightly they trembled. He watched as the doctor checked Liam's breathing, took his temperature. Then, a pause. A frown. Callum knew that look. He hated that look. He had seen it before, when the doctors had diagnosed his wife, when they had hesitated, carefully choosing their words, because they had nothing good to say. The doctor lowered the thermometer, his expression grave. It could be pneumonia. A cold chill ran down Callum's spine. His vision blurred for a second. No, then treat him. His voice was low, sharp, a command, not a request. Give him medication. Do something. The doctor hesitated. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately." The world spun. Callum felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. No, not again. His mind reeled, flashing back. His wife, pale and frail, lying in that hospital bed. The weak grasp of her fingers in his. The way she had looked at him in the end, as if she knew he couldn't save her. And now, Liam. His son. lying there, helpless. His fortune, his power, none of it meant a damn thing, because in this moment, he was just a man watching someone he loved slip further and further away. He refused to let it happen. Without waiting another second, Callum scooped Liam into his arms. The blanket fell away, but he didn't stop to pick it up. "Prepare the car," he ordered. The house staff hesitated. "Sir, the storm is severe. It might not be safe. Do it. Now." His voice was raw, seething. "I don't care about the storm. I care about my son." The wind howled louder, rattling the glass. Callum stepped outside, the freezing air slashing across his skin like 1,000 tiny knives. He didn't flinch, didn't care. All that mattered was getting Liam to the hospital. The car door flew open, and he carefully placed Liam in the back seat, wrapping the boy in blankets. Then he slid into the driver's seat. For the first time in his life, Callum Sterling felt completely, utterly powerless. Money, influence, none of it mattered. If he lost Liam, he would have nothing, absolutely nothing. The storm raged around them, but inside the car, Callum could only hear two things: the thunderous pounding of his own heartbeat and the weak, shallow breaths of his son. The car tore through the blinding snow, its tires skidding across ice-laden streets. Callum drove recklessly, ignoring speed limits, ignoring red lights, ignoring the blaring horns of other cars. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting Liam to the hospital in time. Every shallow breath from the back seat filled the suffocating silence inside the car. Callum stole a glance at the rearview mirror. Liam was still delirious, his tiny hand clutching at the blanket. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his breath labored. The sight was a knife straight to Callum's chest. Outside, the blizzard roared. But inside the car, the only sound Callum could hear was the frantic pounding of his own heart. For the first time, he didn't know if he could save his son. The tires screeched against the pavement as the car skidded to a stop in front of the hospital. Callum threw open the door, gathering Liam into his arms. "I need a doctor. Now!" His voice was raw, desperate. "He has a high fever." Chaos erupted. Doctors and nurses rushed forward, wheeling Liam inside. Callum followed, but just as he reached the emergency room doors, a nurse blocked his path. "Sir, you can't go in. We need to assess his condition first." The doors shut, and for the first time in his life, Callum Sterling was left behind. He stood frozen outside the emergency room, his body rigid, his mind numb. The sharp clatter of footsteps echoed through the sterile white hallway, fluorescent lights casting an unforgiving glow over the cold tile floor. Everything blurred at the edges. He leaned back against the wall, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Lost my wife. And now I could lose my son. He couldn't let that happen. Every ounce of power, every dollar he had, none of it mattered here. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, the door finally opened. Amara stepped out, still in her white coat, exhaustion evident in her posture. But her voice was steady. "Liam's stable. He's out of danger." The breath Callum had been holding finally released. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this kind of fear. Amara stepped aside, giving him a clear view through the glass window. Liam lay in the hospital bed, no longer trembling from fever. His breathing was steadier now. His forehead, once damp with sweat, had been gently wiped clean. Callum couldn't look away. Not because Liam had just fought through an illness, but because of her. Amara sat beside Liam, placing a warm cloth on his forehead. Her fingers moved through his damp hair, gentle and reassuring. She whispered something, too soft for Callum to hear, but even without the words, he knew they were filled with comfort, with love. Liam stirred. His eyelashes fluttered open. Slowly, weakly, his small hand reached out, searching for something. Callum held his breath. His son wasn't reaching for him, he was reaching for her. Miss Amara. Will you stay with me? No hesitation, no second-guessing. Amara nodded. Of course. Callum felt something deep inside him tighten. It wasn't jealousy, it was realization. And the truth hit him like a sledgehammer. His son needed her more than he needed him. Liam trusted her, loved her. The sense of safety, the security that should have come from a father, was being given to his son by someone else. Liam hadn't said, "Dad, I'm scared." He had said, "Miss Amara, will you stay with me?" A simple request. Yet it shattered something inside Callum. I failed him. His hands dropped to his sides, fingers still bloodless from how hard he had been clenching them. He wanted to step forward, wanted to hold his son, wanted to tell him, "I'm here. I'll always be here." But the truth was, Liam had never truly believed that. His throat burned, his vision blurred. Callum turned away, stepping back until his spine met the cold hospital wall. He tilted his head back, eyes shutting tightly. For the first time in his life, Callum Sterling wept. Hot tears spilled down his face, tracing silent paths down his skin before falling onto the icy tile floor. He didn't wipe them away, because right now, nothing else mattered. Not money, not power, not the billion-dollar deals he had once worshipped. If he couldn't be a father to his own son, then none of it meant anything at all. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the city in white. But tonight, the real storm was the one raging inside Callum Sterling. The warmth of his tears still clung to Callum's skin as he stood there, his back pressed against the cold, sterile wall of the hospital corridor. Inside the room, Amara remained with Liam. She didn't turn to look at him. Maybe she hadn't seen him, or maybe she had, and she knew this was a moment he had to face alone. Callum lowered his head, drawing in a slow, unsteady breath. He couldn't stay here. He needed space. He needed air. On instinct, he turned and walked toward the elevator, pressing the button for the highest floor. The metal doors slid open with a soft ding. The rooftop was a world apart from the suffocating hallways below. The wind lashed at his face the second he stepped outside. Snow fell thick and relentless, swirling in the darkness, consuming the sky. Below him, New York stretched out in all its brilliance, glittering, powerful, untouchable. But from here, none of it mattered. Callum pulled his hands from the warmth of his coat pockets, letting the icy air bite at his skin. He closed his eyes, and everything in his mind spun like a hurricane. The first image, his wife, lying in that hospital bed. Her dark hair fanned across the pillow, her once bright eyes dulled by illness. Callum, you can't control everything. Sometimes, you just need to be here. But he hadn't been. He had spent too much time trying to fix things, never realizing some things couldn't be bought, couldn't be undone. The second image. Liam, just moments ago, in that hospital bed. His small hand reaching out, not for him, for Amara. Miss Amara, will you stay with me? His son hadn't asked for his presence because Liam had never believed he would be there. And that was his fault. The third image, Amara, her gaze unwavering, full of quiet defiance. Money doesn't buy happiness. He had dismissed her then, had thought she simply didn't understand his world. But standing here now, alone, empty, terrified of losing everything, Callum realized he was the one who had understood nothing at all. His fist clenched, the truth hit him like a blade, cutting deep. He had spent his life chasing power, but in the end, power hadn't saved his wife, hadn't made his son trust him, hadn't given him a life that meant anything. His eyes flickered open, icy blue reflecting the faint glow of the city below. And then, he reached for his phone. His fingers, numb from the cold, dialed the number by instinct. On the second ring, a voice answered. Sterling. His lawyer sounded surprised. Didn't expect. A call from you at this hour. Callum inhaled deeply. When he spoke, his voice was steady, unshaken. Prepare the paperwork. I want to fund a public hospital. Silence. Then, I'm sorry, did you just say, I want to set up a scholarship for young nurses? Callum continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. His entire career had been built on profit, on numbers, deals, gains. But for the first time, he was making a decision with nothing to gain, and, strangely, it felt right. His lawyer cleared his throat. Are you sure? This isn't exactly... Do it. Callum cut him off, his voice firm. He ended the call before the man could respond. Shoving the phone back into his pocket, he lifted his gaze to the sky. The snow was still falling, but this time, it wasn't a storm threatening to swallow him whole. This time, it was just snow, and Callum Sterling, a man who had once believed he could control everything, had finally learned how to let go. When the call with his lawyer ended, Callum remained on the hospital rooftop. The phone in his hand felt heavier than usual. The wind was still biting, the snow still falling, but inside him, something had become lighter. For the first time, he didn't feel trapped by the past, but the question remained, would this be enough? His footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors as he made his way down the long, empty corridor. The hospital had quieted. Family members of patients slept on waiting room chairs, their exhaustion etched into their slumped postures. Doctors moved slowly, their steps heavy after endless hours on shift. Everything was still. Everything, except his mind. Callum stopped outside Liam's room. Through the glass, he saw her. Amara sat beside Liam's bed, her eyes never leaving him. No one had asked her to stay, but she had, and that was when Callum realized. She had always been there, even when he hadn't noticed. Not for money, not for obligation. Simply because she cared. He closed his eyes. How long? How long had it been since he had done the same? Since he had sat beside his son, not out of duty, not out of responsibility, but out of love? Callum didn't step inside. He stood there, watching in silence. Everything inside him was shifting, but he didn't yet know how to show it. He wasn't a man of pretty words. He couldn't simply say, "I've changed," and expect Amara to believe. He had to prove it. His gaze dropped to his wrist. The $1 million watch gleamed under the fluorescent light, a symbol of power. A symbol of the man he had once been. Callum unfastened it. No hesitation, no second thoughts. He curled his fingers around the cold weight of it. Then he slipped it into his coat pocket. He was ready. Turning away, he headed for the waiting room. Tonight, he wouldn't leave. Not because he had to, but because his son needed him. And tomorrow morning, he would show Amara that he had truly changed. Not with words, but with actions. Callum didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair outside Liam's hospital room, arms resting loosely on his knees, eyes fixed on the cold marble floor. In the stillness of the hospital, the ticking of the wall clock felt slower than ever. He had spent countless nights awake before. Nights when he stayed up closing billion-dollar deals. Nights when grief kept him prisoner, haunted by the loss of his wife. But this was the first night he had stayed awake because he was afraid of losing his son, and for the first time, money was the last thing on his mind. A pale sliver of dawn crept through the white curtains, casting soft streaks of light across the floor. The room remained quiet, except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Liam was still asleep, but his color had returned. His breathing was no longer strained. Callum sat by his bedside, watching him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he truly looked at his son. Liam's hair was slightly tousled, his long lashes fluttering against his pale cheeks. He looked so small beneath the hospital blankets, fragile in a way that made Callum's chest tighten. Gently, hesitantly, he reached out and placed his hand over Liam's. One day, his son would grow up. He would become a man, and Callum didn't want him to grow up not knowing he was loved, didn't want him to become like him, a child who had learned to survive alone, lost among glass towers and empty wealth. Callum inhaled, deeply. The door opened softly. Amara stepped inside, still wearing her white coat. She parted her lips to speak but stopped abruptly, because what she saw made her freeze. Callum was sitting there, but for the first time, there was no phone in his hand, no laptop, no contract or business report spread out in front of him. Instead, beside a glass of water on the table, lay a Rolex watch worth millions, an emblem of power, a symbol of who Callum Sterling had always been. Now, abandoned on a cold, sterile surface. Amara frowned. Then realization struck her. Callum Sterling never removed his watch, not in meetings, not at extravagant galas, not in the most defining moments of his life. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a statement, a reminder that time was money, that every second had a price. Yet now, he had taken it off. He had set it aside. He had chosen something else. Amara's gaze shifted back to Callum, and in that moment, she saw it, the change in his eyes. Callum wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at Liam, as if memorizing this moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached forward and lifted his son into his arms. Liam stirred slightly, his small body curling against Callum's chest. His head rested just below Callum's collarbone. Warm breath ghosting against the fabric of his shirt, Callum held him closer, not perfectly, not smoothly, but with an unmistakable sincerity. He had never done this before. Even when his wife was alive, moments like these had been rare. But right now, he didn't want to do anything except hold his son. Amara didn't need to ask him anything. She didn't need to hear him say he had changed. She could see it. The Rolex, discarded on the table. Callum Sterling, the man who once prioritized work above all else, now holding his son as if it was the only thing that mattered. This was a declaration, a confession without words. Amara pressed a hand to her lips, trying to steady the lump rising in her throat. She had once believed that Callum Sterling couldn't change, that he was too arrogant, too hardened to ever understand that love was more valuable than wealth. But she had been wrong. He didn't have to say it. His actions proved it. A single tear slipped down Amara's cheek. At that moment, Callum finally lifted his head. For the first time, he truly looked at her, not with the sharp, calculating gaze of a businessman, not with the guarded curiosity of a man who had never trusted love, but with the eyes of someone who had finally figured out what mattered most. And for the first time, Amara no longer found Callum Sterling intimidating. She saw a man, flawed, broken, trying to mend what he had spent years ignoring, trying to be better, trying to be there. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the first golden rays of morning light into the room, and in that moment, they both understood. This wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of something new. The sun had risen high in the sky, yet Callum still hadn't left the hospital. Liam was better. He had woken up with bright, clear eyes, and for the first time in months, he hadn't asked about his mother. Callum stayed with his son, never once checking his email, never once taking a call from his office. He had learned how to put his phone down, how to look at his child without distraction. But that wasn't enough, because when Amara left the hospital room that morning, she didn't look back. She had seen Callum change. She had shed tears watching him hold Liam in his arms. But she still didn't trust him, and Callum knew, if he let her walk away now, he might lose her forever. So he didn't leave the hospital to return to the cold, towering glass buildings of the Upper East Side. He left the hospital to find her. Brooklyn was a world away from the life Callum Sterling knew. There were no lines of luxury cars snaking through the streets like in Manhattan. No skyscrapers reflecting the sunset like massive diamonds. Instead, there was a quiet warmth here, something Callum had once considered ordinary. But now, it felt like peace. He climbed the steps to the small apartment where Amara lived. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the center of a place. No one turned to acknowledge him. No one whispered his name in reverence. No one bowed to his wealth or status. And for the first time, Callum Sterling didn't mind. He stood before the door, raised his hand, then hesitated. He had never hesitated signing $1 billion deal, had never hesitated walking into a boardroom full of men who wanted to see him fail. Yet now, standing at the doorstep of a woman, he felt something dangerously close to nervousness. He closed his eyes for a second, then he knocked. The knock echoed in the quiet. A few seconds later, the door opened. Amara stood there, dressed in a simple beige sweater and jeans. Her hair was loose, not the neatly tied style she wore at the hospital, but it wasn't her clothes or her hair that caught Callum's attention. It was her eyes, flicker of surprise, a trace of hesitation. Gone was the softness she had for Liam. Gone was the patience she had for her patients. Standing before him was Amara, a woman who had been hurt before, looking at a man she wasn't sure she could trust. For a moment, neither of them moved. Callum parted his lips about to say something, then stopped. He had always had a plan, a prepared speech, a strategy to persuade, but this time, he had nothing. Only one thought echoed in his mind. He took a slow breath, then spoke. No control, no arrogance, only honesty. "Will you take a walk with me today?" Amara didn't answer right away. She blinked, as if trying to process what she had just heard. And for the first time in his life, Callum felt something he never had before. The fear of rejection. Not the fear of a failed business deal, not the fear of losing an investment, but this, the fear that she would say no, and he would lose the only person he truly wanted to keep. She studied him, tilting her head slightly. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Why?" Callum swallowed. There were so many things he could say. He could tell her he had changed, that he wanted her to believe him, that he wanted to start over. But none of it was enough. In the end, he simply told her the only truth that mattered. A truth that, for the first time, had no plan attached to it. "I don't know," he exhaled. "I just know that. I want to be here. A simple confession, but one that changed everything." Amara didn't speak. Her eyes searched his, looking for something. A sign, a crack, a lie. But this time, Callum wasn't hiding anything. He just stood there, unarmed, unmasked, just a man waiting for a chance. For the first time in his life, Callum Sterling waited, not knowing the answer, and for the first time, that didn't terrify him. It made him hope. Amara looked at Callum, a quiet thoughtfulness in her eyes. Under the soft glow of the streetlights as snowflakes drifted soundlessly through the air, Callum Sterling, the man who once stood at the pinnacle of power, the man who controlled an empire of wealth, now stood before her waiting for an answer, not for profit, not for victory, but simply because he wanted to be here, because he wanted her to believe in him. Amara pressed her lips together, inhaling deeply. She had spent too much time guarding herself against Callum's world. But maybe it was time to believe in the new one he was trying to build. A faint smile touched her lips. She pulled her sweater tighter around herself and stepped forward, past the threshold. "Then let's go," she said, her voice as light as the winter breeze. Callum blinked, surprised. Then he smiled. Not the smile of a man who had won, just the quiet, content smile of someone who had found something he never thought he would. They walked side by side, and Christmas awaited them. The park had never looked more magical. Strings of twinkling lights wrapped around every tree branch, casting a soft golden glow on the snow-covered ground. Laughter and warmth filled the air, couples strolling hand in hand, families gathered in circles, the crisp night alive with joy. A world completely different from the sterile boardrooms and steel skyscrapers Callum had known. And in the middle of it all, Callum, Amara, and Liam walked together. Liam ran ahead, his small boots sinking into the fresh snow. Then, with a mischievous glint in his eyes, he turned back, scooped up a handful of snow, and launched it straight at Callum. "Got you," Liam shouted, giggling. Callum looked down at his now snow-covered coat, then shook his head, exhaling a sigh of mock defeat. Bending down, he gathered a handful of snow, rolling it carefully in his palms. Liam's eyes widened in horror. But just as he braced for impact, Callum let the snowball fall gently to the ground, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. Liam burst into laughter, his joy echoing through the park. Amara watched them, and something inside her softened. She had never expected to see this. Callum Sterling, the man who once believed money controlled everything, now learning how to let go, how to love without reason. They strolled past a small stall selling hot chocolate. The air was thick with the rich aroma of cocoa and cinnamon, warmth spilling from inside. Callum suddenly stopped. "What do you like to drink?" he asked. Amara frowned. "What?" He shrugged. "Last time, you told me you didn't need to see my world to know that money can't buy happiness." A pause. Then a small, knowing smile. "But maybe I need to see yours." Amara stilled, not because the words were grand or poetic, but because they were real. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Hot chocolate. Less sugar." Callum nodded, then stepped into the stall's line. Through the frosted window, Amara watched him, and a strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. Callum Sterling, the man who had lived in a world of fine wine and extravagant restaurants, where menus were printed on sheets of gold, now stood waiting in line, buying a cup of hot chocolate. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. They sat on a stone bench, their breaths turning into soft clouds in the cold air. Liam played, in the snow ahead of them, lost in his own world. Callum handed Amara her drink, and as she took it, their fingers brushed. She could have pulled away. Before, she would have. But this time, she didn't. They sat there, quiet, just watching Liam, letting the peace settle around them. Then Callum turned to her, his voice low, steady, but more honest than any declaration she had ever heard. "I may not be perfect." Amara met his gaze, then smiled softly. "No one is. No grand promises. No sweeping confessions. Just the quiet understanding of two people who had found something real. Something worth holding on to. Somewhere in the city, Wall Street's billboards flashed with endless numbers. The markets churned, relentless as ever. The world of finance spun like a hurricane, unyielding and consuming. But Callum Sterling no longer belonged to that storm. Because right here, in a park blanketed in snow, he had found the only thing that ever truly mattered, and for the first time in his life, he was happy. Love is not a transaction. It cannot be bought, measured in numbers, or forced upon someone. But love can be built. Through small gestures, quiet moments, and choices made with the heart instead of the mind. Those are the things that truly change a person. Callum Sterling spent a lifetime believing happiness was found in stock market numbers, in deals closed, in empires built. But in the end, happiness wasn't in the flashing figures on Wall Street. It was in his son's embrace. In a cup of hot chocolate bought for the woman he loved, in a silent touch shared beneath a winter sky. And what about you? Do you believe a person can truly change for love? Have you ever witnessed someone step out of their comfort zone to become something more? Share your thoughts in the comments below, And if you love deeply emotional stories like this, don't forget to hit follow so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next story.